Hey guys, this is Matthew. I just wanted to put together this quick video as far as the questions for Quiz 1 and Web Design 1. And so let's just take a look at some of these questions that you should see on your end. And the first one is describe the structure of HTML pages briefly. And so let's go back to Chrome and brackets. Also notice how I'm kind of setting things up where I have brackets on the left-hand side so I can see the code. And then on the right-hand side, I have the index.html file that has been created or that I created, and I'm rendering it with the browser on the right-hand side. So when I make changes here, I can immediately refresh here and see the changes. And so it's just kind of nice to be able to go back and forth really, really conveniently. So, but the first question is all about the structure of HTML. And essentially what we have is there's an opening bracket, which is here, just called HTML. And then there's a closing for that tag. Okay, and by the way, I think I just misspoke. There's the HTML tag that's opening up the document, and at the very end is a closing HTML tag that is closing out the document. So these two tags are wrapped around everything. And then things indent, and there is another section of an HTML document that is called the head portion of the document. And that's where you're going to have the title of your website, okay? And actually, if you notice, this text right here is the exact same text that you're going to see up in this tab. And I'm using Google Chrome. It might differ a little bit dependent on if you're using Safari or some other browser. But notice how the title actually can be changed or is visible here in this tab. Okay, so that's the head portion of the document, and we're not going to indent in, it's at the same level, and that's why indentation is really handy, because we can see HTML is holding all of this business. Then the head portion of the document indents, and then actually these two head tags are holding the title. And notice how there's an opening for the title and a closing for the title. And so you can start to kind of read and see this nesting system. But then the head portion of the document closes, so we can start another section of the website pretty much at the same level. So the head and the body sections of the HTML document are at the same level or tier, okay? And so those are the primary, in my opinion, those are really the primary elements of a website. You have the HTML tags that are wrapping around everything and kind of cradling and holding everything. Then there's the head portion of the document, and then the body portion of the document. Notice how the head portion has an opening and a closing. Additionally, the body portion of the document has an opening and a closing. When things are indented over, that usually indicates that it's sort of a next tier or level into the nesting process. So 1, 2, 3, or A, B, C, or A, B, C. Okay, if that makes sense. So that's structure. Let's go back to our quiz questions. What does first one in, last one out mean regarding the organization of HTML structure? Hint, HTML body paragraph, the HTML tag begins and ends with structure. Okay, so we were kind of talking about that a little bit. Like the first tag in is this HTML tag. Notice how it is the last one out. Then a new tag starts at this level. And it's the first one in at this level, okay? And then embedded within the opening and the closing of the head tags is the title, which is wrapped in tags. The title tag closes out, and then the head tag closes out, okay? And so pretty much the rule of thumb is that every single tag needs an opening and a closing. And it should kind of flow, almost sort of like a bell curve, okay? It's more evident in a larger document, but you can definitely see a little bit of bell curve in a micro way here within the head portion of the document. But first one in, for example, in this circumstance is the HTML tag. It's opening up and allowing for all this other business to happen. And then everything closes, closes, closes. And the last thing to actually close out is the first one. The HTML tag is opening here and closing there. Okay, so I hope that sort of clarifies that. It's more evident or obvious to answer that question when you actually start doing the coding. Okay. So let's see, the third question, where can you find, I'm going to highlight this. Where can you find the code that represents the visible content rendered by a web browser within an HTML document? Hint, the user will see this. The user is a buzzword. I mean, we're the designer or developer on the back end of the website. On the front end of the website, the user is the one who's actually seeing things. So for example, anyone looking at a website that's rendered. So the invisible portion of the document is right here. And so this is where you would have a lot of metadata, and we'll talk about that in later chapters like SEO data, keywords, author, et cetera, et cetera. That's sort of like invisible information where if you looked at the back end of a website with like Google Chrome, for example, you might find that sort of thing. But the stuff that the user is actually going to see primarily takes place in the body portion of the document, okay? And so this, although it's kind of funny because I just pointed out, we can sort of see that up here in the tab, the title of the document, but the remainder of like, SEO metadata, that's going to be invisible, and Google spiders are going to be noticing that sort of thing, not the user. But the visible aspect of a website primarily takes place within the body portion, okay? And actually, we sort of just answered the next question by talking about the invisible content. So we talked about the visible content, and the invisible content, remember, is actually in the head portion of the document that I'm highlighting there. Okay. What is the difference between a tag and an attribute? Well, all of these guys are tags, whether it's an opening or a closing, okay? An attribute is essentially a variable or a modifier of an attribute. So for example, this H1, I did include two attributes. I wanted the font to be Verdana, and I wanted the color to be green. So let's just confirm that that is happening. It's actually not happening right now. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay, we have an error there. This should actually be changing color. Let's try it in a different location. I'm just kind of curious to see what's going on. Okay, I'll have to come back to that so that I'm not burning time with this brief tutorial video. But yes, this is a tag, and this is an attribute, an example attribute that would actually give some tag, some direction, or a variable, or some sort of a variable. Okay. Let's see, what are headings in HTML structure? Okay, I tried to make that pretty evident in what I was doing here. There's an H1. You can see here that the H1 is the largest header. It's almost kind of like, in a newsprint or a newspaper, on the front of a newspaper, there are going to be different sort of scales of announcements as far as news that indicate importance. that's kind of what a header is. So H1 is the most important. H2 is the second most important. H3 is the third most important, okay? And you can see that by default, there's scale associated with these H1s. But the other thing about H1s, or excuse me, headers in general, is that they're valuable for search engine optimization. So for example, Google is always looking for the title of a website within the H1 because, so for example, if someone goes to Google and they Google my name and they happen to also Google artist, if I have a page set up with an H1, hopefully Google will point the user to that website immediately, or Google will notice those H1s immediately. All of this content is going to be crawled and archived and sort of, that's what Google does. It's just crawling the web constantly so that it can point you in the right direction as far as the best search that you're plugging in. And those H1s and associated H2s, H3s, and it can even go down to like H6s. I don't think I did that with the code over here, but you can get into the nitty gritty with headers, although I rarely go beyond an H3 or a header 3. Okay. What are paragraphs in HTML structure? Well, kind of going back to this document, you can see that I did create, they're not lists, but I just created some paragraph text. So you can see the paragraph tag opening and then the paragraph tag closing, kind of repeating itself, item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4. And so, we could put any text we wanted between those two tags to create some text, okay? And paragraph text is just simply, exactly how it sounds. It's plain Jane paragraph text that should follow usually some sort of a header or title, okay? What does the tag B mean and I mean, or excuse me, do, and how are they similar or dissimilar to strong and emphasis? B stands for bold. I stands for, gosh, italic. Had a brain fart there. Bold, italic, and this is the old school HTML way of writing that code. And basically the newer way of writing the code is with strong and emphasis. So bold and strong are essentially the same thing, and italic and emphasis are the same thing too, this EM indicating emphasis. I believe I did, where did I do that? Here we go. Okay, so here is some bold text. Here is some italicized text. And so if we go over here, we can see this item has been made bold, and this item, which is just plain paragraph text, has been italicized, okay? What is a break, or when is a break useful? How would you apply it and why? And so I can just kind of cut and paste this text, and I'm going to plug it into the document over here so that you guys can see. By default, you might notice that, there's some spacing between these paragraph text items. And sometimes you don't want that spacing. Sometimes you just want this text or these letter forms, or maybe another sentence or something to drop to the next line. And so with item 4, I'm going to do it down here above publications. I'm going to drop the 4 down below, okay? And it's sort of an exception to the rule also. Kind of notice that this break tag does not need an opening and a closing. You can just submit the break tag on its own and it works. Don't ask me why they wrote it that way. It's just the way it is, okay? But there's no error occurring here. It's still reading it. So I plugged in the break text. Now I'm going to come, and I saved it, Command S. Now I'm going to come over here and hit refresh, and you can see how that 4 just dropped down, okay? Okay, so which HTML tag is intended for quotations? I was actually looking this up online, I believe. Let me see if I can. I'm just going to do a new search here. HTML quotations. One of the wonderful things about HTML is you can just kind of search and find things. So here, this is a beautiful resource, W3C, W3 Schools. It'll render stuff, but it'll also give you the code. So I'm just going to copy this and move it over to my brackets, and I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to drop it below the H2 for references to see what happens. So there's an initial paragraph tag and closing with some text inside, and essentially there's the block quote with the citation, and it's just going to nudge stuff over. So if I save, I'm going to do the same drill and then come over here and refresh, we can see how a quotation can be rendered. Okay. So that covers quiz 1. I thought these would be helpful to folks to just kind of walk through this business. Have a good evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.